if we don't learn to validate that part of ourselves that does want to be seen, validate that part of ourselves that does want to get some engagement on our social media, validate that part of ourselves that wants to like dress up and look hot and show themselves off a bit, that version of ourselves that maybe needs a little bit of external gratification. If we don't acknowledge that, oh, I'm just being human, that's just literally an intrinsic part of me. If we don't learn to validate that part of ourselves, and I speak from experience, we then take the very dangerous opposite route, and we struggle deeply with letting our lights shine. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Try, Adjust, Thrive. I'm your host, Oksana Vares, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal growth in every aspect. I'm talking spiritual, physical, mental, all the things. Okay, so for anybody who is new and not aware, we are currently in our third season of Try, Adjust, Thrive, which is the Butterfly series coming out of the chrysalis. This series, I was really inspired to unpack all the ways that we can shed old skin and embrace ourselves as we are so we can become these blooming, thriving, fluttering butterflies. Butterflies don't bloom, but y'all know what I mean. So ultimately, this season is all about just coming into our power. And I would actually say that a great deal of becoming the quote unquote best versions of ourselves comes a lot with being at peace with who we are now, who we were in the past, and just kind of radically accepting ourselves, no matter what flaws we might want to work on. And this has seemed to be a theme in conversations I've had with other people, in ways that I've communicated with myself. And so I just wanted to get behind the mic and unpack it. So the reason I think this is so important is because we all struggle with cringing at past versions of ourselves. We all struggle with, wanting to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be so we can progress further and further and further. And for those of you who don't know, I actually live in New York City, and I see a lot of that because people who come here to like make something of themselves. They come here to really expand in a career sense, and they come here to basically one-up themselves and also one-up each other. And it can oftentimes be almost just like a massive ego trip just living in New York. And y'all know I prioritize peace and encourage others to also maintain their peace. And so with that, it can be a bit of it's a double-edged sword, right? Because we all want to be our best selves. We all want to see ourselves, impress ourselves. We all want to ultimately make the most of our human experience, right? And in doing so, we can oftentimes be much harder on ourselves than we need to be, our past selves and our present selves. I myself can tend to struggle a lot with cringing at my past self or wishing that my past self did things differently. And also my current self, wishing that my current self was more of a hustler, did more work. And it's really strange for me to admit that because, as those of you who listen on a regular basis know, I'm a major advocate for rest. And I understand the importance of stepping away from all the craziness and stepping away from the chaos of our lives in order to tune in with ourselves so we can better appear in the world. So I digress and return back to my main point. Because I was struggling with a lot of these thought patterns, particularly the past week, I became unavoidably aware that we need to befriend every aspect of ourselves if we want to excel and also just be in the most abundant version of ourselves. Being the version of ourselves that loves ourselves unconditionally, even when we falter, even when we behave in a way that wasn't in alignment with our higher self. Yesterday, I was talking with a coworker about how we both cringe at ourselves in high school. And oftentimes, I can spiral about the past versions of me in high school and college because, full disclosure, I was really lost. And honestly, I don't even need to preface that with a full disclosure because we were all really lost. Let's be real. But I could oftentimes look back on cringy things that I used to do or opportunities that I said no to or didn't take advantage of to their fullest. And I would just get so upset with myself. And I've had to learn to just take a step back and realize that she was really doing the best that she could. And I think that we all need to understand that. I think we all need to actually stop judging ourselves for a second to acknowledge that even if I'm not being literally a firecracker every single day, I'm still doing the best I can do today. And for those of you who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, I know that I probably sound like a broken record when it comes to this subject, but I can't say it enough because I just want the whole world to be happier. I really want the entire world to realize that life is not that deep. And the most important thing ultimately in life is our relationship with ourselves. So let's go back to making peace with ourselves in every form. So there's a lot of stuff that I did when I was younger that I don't agree with now, that I wouldn't do now. But we are all who we are right now. And we can either radically accept that and embrace who we are because who we are right now in this moment is enough. Or we can berate ourselves and we can bully ourselves and we can doubt ourselves and look down at ourselves for not being a certain version of ourselves in a different timeline. And ultimately, a lot of that, I think, stems from regret from the past and regret of choices that we made in the past. But I want you to take a second and really look at yourself and evaluate all the amazing things you have in your life. Because also, if you listen to this podcast, I would like to hope that you at least sometimes practice your gratitude affirmations. So I know that you have things to be grateful for. And if you don't practice gratitude, I heavily encourage it because it will change your life. Think about all the amazing things that you have in your life. Think about the amazing people that you're connected to. Think about your pets. Think about your home. Think about, your family. Think about the last cute outfit you wore. Think about your job, even if it's not your dream job. Even if it's not your dream job, think about all the ways that your current circumstances, even if they're not your dream current circumstances, have impacted your life in a positive way. And you tell me that you're not worthy right now. Because I have to do this for myself. When I was in high school and college, I was convinced that I would be on Broadway right now. And girly pops and boily drops, I am not on Broadway right now. Dare I say that is not even really a goal of mine. But I could spend so much time ruminating over that. However, what's a better use of my time is looking at how, back in college, I feel like I didn't take advantage of all the opportunities that came my way because I was really scared. I struggled a lot with anxiety. I struggled with depression. I struggled so much with just feeling like I was inherently worthy, feeling like I was enough, feeling like what I had to offer was worthy of being booked professionally by a theater company or a film company or any sort of entertainment industry. And so as a result, I stunted myself from pursuing a lot of opportunities, from really putting myself out there. And I could hate myself for it till the day I die. However, I could also take the more productive route and realize that at that time, maybe my mission in life wasn't to transform myself into a Broadway-ready performer. Maybe at that time, I was meant to heal my relationship with my mind. Maybe I needed to feel cripplingly anxious and depressed in order for me to understand that I need to work on those things. Maybe I needed to feel those things so heavily, and maybe they needed to hold me back so that I could understand that part of my life's mission, and honestly, my mission with this podcast, is to encourage people to take the actionable steps to break free of that self-imposed prison. And that's just my own personal example from one aspect of my life. And this can extend to literally everything. I know so many people, and my past self included, who look at people that they've dated in the past and they like vomit. And they're like, I can't believe I dated that person. I can't believe I wasted time on that a-hole. What a terrible human being. Like, what a waste of time. What a yada, yada, yada. And sure, it's totally valid and totally understandable for us to dislike how a person affected us. It is completely understandable that we don't think highly of certain people that we've dated because they fucked us up. But ultimately, hating ourselves for quote unquote wasting time on those people, I think, while it has its time and place, and while we need that period of, working through the breakup and working through those emotions that really haunted us for a while, once that's passed, once we've gotten through the angry phase, it's important for us to acknowledge that, even the worst relationships, and obviously there are outliers because nobody deserves to experience an abusive situation. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that whatsoever. However, even the worst relationships I've been in, I can argue have also been the best relationships that I've been in because they taught me so much about myself and the energy that I let into my world, into my space, my bubble. And I increased my self-esteem so much after those relationships because in hindsight, I was able to see that I had low self-esteem, that I had poor boundaries, that I had no boundaries. And I could spend all day long telling my old self, how could you have gotten with that person? But I could also acknowledge that that version of myself just wanted to feel love, because love is one of the best experiences that this world has to offer. That version of me just wanted to feel validated. And that version of me didn't know how to validate herself. And now I do. And so ultimately, had I not been through those experiences, I wouldn't be the version of myself that is such a radiant version of me and will only become more radiant as time goes on. And even when I look back at the jobs that I hated working in the past, those jobs paid my rent. Did they negatively impact me at times? Yes. But they got me through. And I guess this episode might be synonymous with just silver linings in general, but it goes deeper than that because now I want to get into our ego and the importance of becoming friends with our ego and building a healthy relationship with our ego. So as a performing artist, the world that I exist in is largely composed of balancing your ego with your soul. And what I mean by that is everyone in the performing arts industry wants to feel seen. Everyone in entertainment wants to feel seen through their work. However, we also have that catch-22 of when your ego is driving the car, then your soul kind of takes a back seat, your soul being like your creative intuition, that part of you that has all these amazing ideas, that part of you that creates things. And this goes beyond just the performing arts. This goes for any creative or human being, really, anything. Like, we all have a balancing act in our heads of leading with our soul and our empathy and the kindest part of ourselves, while also balancing out that part of us that wants to be seen and validated and wants attention in one way or another. In relationships and dating and friendships and work and I don't know, at the gym and literally every aspect of our lives, we have this duality of needing to feed our ego so that it feels validated, because if we don't validate our ego to a certain degree, then we're just going to feel inadequate, while also feeding that part of ourselves that knows that we are already intrinsically worthy and knows that we don't need external gratification. That's why social media can be such a double-edged sword, because it's really cool to connect with other people and show people what you're up to, but everybody gets posting anxiety. How many likes am I gonna get? How much engagement am I gonna get out of this post? And trust me, I'm not a fan of it. It's really annoying. It actually it puts a huge wrench in my daily mood. If I could just completely disconnect from social media, I would. But alas, I have this podcast that I care very much about, and I just, I've learned to just make it a fun little art project. And even though it causes stress, I have to validate my ego and make friends with my ego. And so this concept of making friends with our ego is kind of mind-blowing to me, because up until very recently, I hated my ego. I quite literally tried to tailor my life and my daily habits in such a way that rid me of my ego. Because I took The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle a little too far, and I forgot that, oh yeah, I'm never getting rid of my ego. It's literally here to stay. Our human bodies, we will always have an ego. Our brain, we are not getting rid of our ego. It is a integral part of the human experience. And this is the reason why it's so important that we become friends with our egos. Because if we don't learn to validate that part of ourselves that does want to be seen, validate that part of ourselves that does want to get some engagement on our social media, validate that part of ourselves that wants to dress up and look hot and show themselves off a bit, that version of ourselves that maybe needs a little bit of external gratification. If we don't acknowledge that, oh, I'm just being human. That's just literally an intrinsic part of me. I'm not a bad person for having an ego. I'm just a person, point blank. If we don't learn to validate that part of ourselves, and I speak from experience, we then take the very dangerous opposite route, and we struggle deeply with letting our lights shine. And each and every one of us has a beautifully bright light, and we deserve to show ourselves off. We deserve to show off what makes us excited, what lights us up, what inspires us. And now I'm not saying that, you have to post about it on social media, but it makes me sad when I meet somebody or I'm talking to somebody and I find out that they have this really cool talent or passion, and they get really shy about it. And it's totally, totally understandable. But for instance, at my place of work, I have a lot of coworkers who make their own music, and they're so shy about talking about it. I'll be like, "Are you on Spotify?" And they're like, "Yeah, but you don't have to listen to it." I'm like, "No, I'm asking because I'm going to listen to it, you silly goose." And they get so, and I'm not inside of their brains, but it's almost as if they're afraid of being perceived as full of it. So instead, they'd rather keep themselves small. And every single time this happens, I listen to their Spotify and I'm like, this is amazing. There are so many incredible creatives in this world, and I'm so blessed to get exposure to them and their work. And it breaks my heart that so many of them don't want to show off what they have to offer. Now, if it's not your goal to share your craft with people, it's so okay to do that. If it's not your goal to, publicize something that you're passionate about, whether it's musical or athletic or, crafty, that's okay too. We can have things that are just for ourselves. I play the flute in my free time. And it's not something that I want to go up on a stage and do in front of an audience. It's really something that I just enjoy for me. I'm just laughing because it's the flute is such a random thing. Anyway, but when there are things that we create that we wish we had the courage to show off, but we feel the need to play it small. And it's almost like we convince ourselves oh, I don't need to show myself off to people. I don't need to be doing that. That's not necessary. I can just keep this for myself. But on the inside, we really want to. on the inside, we're like, oh no, I think that people would actually rock with this heavily if they heard it out. We owe it to ourselves to make friends with our ego. And I actually have a really great exercise for this. You guys might find it a little wacky silly, so be it, but I kid you not, this has worked wonders for me. So for those of you who don't know, I love journaling. Journaling is a major part of my life, and I highly encourage it to anybody who's trying to just develop a stronger relationship to themselves. And so I came up with this exercise. It kind of just came to me one day when I was journaling about my ego and working on shining my light and showing myself off more, because that's what I want, especially with this podcast. I just kind of started a dialogue, like mid-page, like I'm writing a normal entry, just talking about myself, my life, and reflecting and doing the whole thing. And all of a sudden, I just created a dialogue with my ego and myself. And I didn't necessarily come up with this. I'm pretty sure that in AA, they have you write a letter to your ego when you're becoming sober. So this isn't something I necessarily came up with, but I don't know if this whole dialogue thing is something that people do. I'm sure it is, but this was the first time that I heard about it, and it came from my own brain. So I'll take pride in that. And so I start talking to my ego, and for so long I've stifled my ego and that part of myself that wants to be seen. And so I was like, all right, I need to give my ego the floor. And so I literally write ego in a little colon, and my ego just starts talking, and it's like, yeah, I want to be seen. I actually think that this podcast is pretty darn good. And I also think that you're a really good singer. And I also think that, we have all these really cool things that we're good at, and we're just afraid to put it out there to the world because we're afraid of being judged. But like, I want to be seen. I'm tired of this. And I kid you not, it was like, it didn't even feel like I was writing, because I think these desires were just so deeply shoved down and hidden away that I was like, whoa, I didn't know that's how I felt. And so I continue writing, and I'm just like, you have all of these things going for you, and you literally are hiding them from the world. Who fucking cares how many people like what you put out? But you're not even giving them the chance to dislike it or like it. And that kind of really made me start thinking about, like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it even make a sound? And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing that with myself. And let me just reiterate one more time. If there are things that you don't want to show off to the world, that you want to just be personal and private to yourself, that is completely fair and that is completely valid. But when it comes to something that you want to show off, even if it's just the cute outfit that you put together that you're afraid to wear out in public, check in with your ego. Ask yourself, like, hey, like, do you want to be seen today? Because here's the thing. As I continued this spiel, and my ego basically had a whole freaking monologue on the page, then my self, like my other self, I guess, was like, okay, I feel like I understand you better now. And my ego was like, listen, I can't do what you do. I can't, like, write songs or create these podcast episodes. That's what you do. But when it comes to actually, like, showing it off to people and being active on social media and creating presentation with your passions, let me take the wheel. It's almost like my ego was like this teenager who was begging their parents to let them practice driving the car. And I was like, oh, no, yeah, you could be like really useful for these things. Like, I really don't actively participate in social media on a regular basis. And so when I made friends with my ego and heard my ego out, I almost was like, wait, we can help each other? ? Like, I never thought about it this way, but It comes down to validating yourself, but also allowing yourself to be all versions of yourself, which includes your ego. And so I ended up just having like a back and forth, line by line conversation with my ego. And I still do it sometimes when I'm feeling in my head or I'm feeling insecure. And I find that especially when I'm feeling insecure, it's really, really helpful to check in with my ego and actually check in and ask myself like why I feel affected in this situation, whether it was between me and a friend or a podcast or work related thing. It really helps to clear up that confusion of like, well, I'm just being a baby. No, you're not. Your ego's just having a little moment. Because even though we're adults, like that doesn't mean that we can't pout every now and then. That doesn't mean that we don't still, feel a little bruised. Like, we need to acknowledge those things. We need to invite in that part of ourselves because I think contrary to popular belief, it does make us more well-rounded. It does make us stronger. We oftentimes, I think, act from a place of self-preservation and wanting to become the, most mature versions of ourselves. So if our ego feels bruised, we oftentimes choose to just shut that part of us down and ignore it because we think that we're being a more mature adult by doing that. But then that feeling is just sitting underneath our skin and it's not going to go away. But if we let ourselves just kind of feel that bruised ego for a moment and acknowledge it and be like, oh, like, yeah, that did upset you, me, that upset us, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to feel hurt in a certain situation. It's okay that someone maybe made you feel invalidated or that, maybe you felt insecure in a certain setting. Like, it's okay to acknowledge that a certain situation made us feel insecure because the thing is even if we invalidate that part of ourselves because we're like, well, I'm being irrational. Whether we're being irrational or not, it affected us. That's the fact of the matter. Point blank. Irrationality or rationality aside, we are still affected by that situation. And we can learn a lot more about ourselves and how to more effectively navigate and improve our relationship with ourselves in situations like that when we hear ourselves out, when we acknowledge our ego that felt bruised in that moment and give them the floor, give them the mic, and be like, all right, let's work through this, not stifle it and mute it. And I swear to you, it's almost uncomfortable how much peace I've had with myself since having this breakthrough. I'm almost like, wait, life feels like too easy, breezy, beautiful right now because I'm working with myself and not against myself. And I'm starting to understand that a large part of growing up and navigating our 20s is learning to understand that life can be easier. We don't have to be in constant dissonance with ourselves. We can learn to validate parts of ourselves that society has told us is wrong or dumb or invalid, that doesn't deserve our time. Because ultimately, a lot of it stems from hustle culture, let's be real. And we know that hustle culture is not everything that it's cracked out to be. Like, we've learned this. But I think we're constantly relearning it, and in the process of doing so, relearning how to encourage ourselves to be fully ourselves. And so just to wrap up, I really want you guys to walk away with this episode knowing that you're allowed to have an ego that wants to feel validated. You're allowed to want to feel seen. You're allowed, and I encourage you to make friends with your ego. And also, going back to our earlier conversation in this episode, you're allowed to love versions of yourself that society has made you feel like you should hate. Because the more that you can do this, the more that you can create harmony where there was dissonance, the more you're going to understand that your true soul purpose and place on this earth can shine through more. Because you're removing that resistance and that friction, and you're just letting your spirit be what it wants to be, instead of keeping it in this box and pushing all these shoulds onto it. And this is an episode all in itself, but we're going to talk eventually about how the word should not be in our vocabulary when it comes to communicating with ourselves. The word should is problematic. The word should can get out so we can get back into ourselves. Okay, guys, that is everything for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. For anybody who made it to the end, wow, you're real. I love you. I hope that you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Thank you once again for tuning in. If you feel like following me on social media, all the links are in the show notes. And if you also feel like sharing this episode, if you got something out of it, share it on social media, share it with your loved ones, send it in a text message, or post about it on your story and tag me so I know that you guys are listening, because it's so cool when you guys do that. And lastly, as always, be kind to yourself. Okay, mwah, I love you. Bye.